Her son Johnny was kidnapped when he was 12 years old out of Des Moines, Iowa, while delivering newspapers. And this case has become a watershed case for a couple of reasons. One, it demonstrates or has illustrated over the years, as the investigation that Noreen conducted demonstrates, that there were some very organized pedophile networks that were out there kidnapping children, and they were forcing them into sexual slavery. The other thing that it has shown and demonstrated is that this problem goes in different directions as far as the involvement of certain possibly rogue elements of our government, i.e. the CIA and other agencies that may serve or stand to benefit from the political compromise of not only political figures, but also influential business people internationally. Because, you kind of say, well, why would they want children? Well, it's a sick world out there. And children bring a very high price in this sexual slavery market. And Noreen's case has demonstrated this very well. Now, what we're going to do this morning is she's going to come on the program and talk about an attack that has been launched against her. It could lead into serious litigation, and may even threaten her ability to continue getting this message out and trying to find out what happened to her son. Therefore, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program this morning Noreen Gosch. Good morning, Noreen, and thank you for being with me.
Good morning, Michael. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Not a problem. I'll tell you, this is really kind of developing into a very interesting scenario. I guess you could call it a scenario, but I know you've met Phil Kronzer, and Phil's been a guest on my show many times, and he himself has spent a lot of his own money trying to get to the bottom of the force or the forces that were involved in destroying his family. He has been subjected to many, many litigious activities or actions on the part of people that are trying to stop him from getting the word out. And I understand now that you are starting to experience kind of a similar kind of situation. Tell me what's going on.
Okay. At the time that I wrote my book, Why Johnny Can't Come Home, there was a man that kept calling me constantly. His name was John Zielinski. And he had written some books on the Amish, and most of them were books that contained photographs with stories about Amish life.
Okay.
And he did a nice job on them. But he kept calling me, asking me if I had started my book yet, which I had. I began writing my book clear back in 1983. And what I would do is write it in chronological form in journals so that later when I put the book into, book style, then all I had to do was just refer to my journals for an ongoing events of what took place. So this man asked me if I was going to include information about MK Ultra and the mind control program, which we know these children were subjected to.
Right.
And I said yes, that I was. And he said, well, I have some books on it that I own that are written by other people. And he said, I'd like to contribute something to the book. He says, I would do some research for you. And so I said to him, well, what do you want for this?
Right.
And he said, I don't want any payment. All I would like is just my expenses covered when I would be in Des Moines working on it. So that was the agreement. He refused to sign anything that would be in writing. I lived up to my promise to pay his expenses, and he took a small furnished apartment.
Mm-hmm.
So I paid for the rent on that for a couple of months, which was all he was here in Des Moines, and provided all the food, gas money, anything he needed. I, on the other hand, also had all the expenses required and involved with producing the book.
Right.
The printing, which was $10,000, and on and on and on. So his contribution were, I would say, some paragraphs in a couple of the chapters that pertain to this MK Ultra and some of the technical things, I call them.
Mm-hmm.
After the book was printed, he showed up at my home approximately 3 months or 4 months later, after the book came back from the printer.
Okay.
And they had been delivered. And he said that he had been talking to his son, who was a law student somewhere in the country. And his son said, "Oh, you should have had a written agreement. Why didn't you?" "Well, we didn't because he wouldn't sign one. We tried. My husband and I tried to get him to sign one." And his son said, "Well, you should have this many $1,000s for your work." And he stood in my living room and presented me with a bill for $18,000.
For $18,000?
$18,000.
Okay.
And I said, and wanted me to sign something. And I said, "No." I said, "That is not the agreement." And I said, "You stated this before 5 other witnesses."
Right.
That this is what you wanted was your expenses covered, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I also gave him cases of books that he could sell for retail also.
Okay.
And so he got angry because I wouldn't sign whatever his son had drafted up for him. Mind you, his son was not an attorney yet.
Yeah.
And he went on his way. Never heard from him again.
Now, Noreen, real quick, how long ago was this confrontation?
About 3 years ago.
Okay, go ahead.
And then I didn't hear from him for 3 years, and then all of a sudden, a few months ago, I was served with papers for a lawsuit in which he was demanding not only the $18,000, but he had tacked on, I think, interest on it, so now we were up to $24,000 that he wanted from me.
Yeah.
And we had to go through the deposition process. And when we went through the depositions, my attorney said, "Where is this man coming from? He has absolutely no proof for any of his allegations."
Right.
"You've got the witnesses. You've got the documentation. I provided all the information about where my book started and when." And he sat, and it became almost comical, because he sat during the depositions and told the attorneys that the idea for writing a book about Johnny Gosch was his idea.
Really?
And I said, "No, the idea for writing a book about my son that was kidnapped was my idea. And I began writing that book a decade and a half before I ever heard of you."
Right.
Well, he still wants to lay claim. And unfortunately, in this United States, anybody can sue anybody, and then the person who is being sued is forced to get attorneys, lay out money to defend yourself for something you didn't do.
Yeah.
Well, then all of a sudden, we were given a court date last week. We only had 4 days to prepare. Okay. And I simply told my attorney, "Well, that can't happen because we don't have enough time to get the witnesses here. Some of them are out of town."
Yeah.
And so the judge then said that we could have a postponement. But in the meantime, and here comes the kicker.
Okay.
In the meantime, we are contacted by this man's son, who is now a full-fledged attorney in Chicago.
Uh-huh.
And they said that they would be willing to drop the suit in exchange for all the remaining inventory of the Why Johnny Can't Come Home and full reprinting rights.
So essentially you just got to give over all of your rights.
Basically give up my story about my son.
Yeah.
And I was so upset and so appalled when the attorney called. I just said to him, I said, "Well, that's out of the question." I said, "This is a story about my son and my life that encompassed the search for him.
Mm-hmm.
This is not about this man." And he said, the attorney, which floored me, my own attorney, said, "Well, it's a heck of a good deal. You should take it." And I said, "A good deal for whom?"
Yeah, really.
The other side. And then after talking to Phil Kronzer in depth, he's been very, very kind to me.
Mm-hmm.
After talking to him in depth, he said, "Noreen, you're living right in the center of where it happened."
Yeah.
And anybody can be bought. He said, "Do you think it's possible that someone put this man up to this to put you out of business?" You see, for years, 20 years, I worked a full-time job and 2 part-time jobs in order to keep the search for Johnny going, pay my living expenses, and keep the foundation going. Then after I wrote the book, I was able to drop one of the jobs, so I only work 2 now instead of 3. And the sales of the books were enough every month to meet the expenses for the Johnny Gosch Foundation.
Right.
And we've done a lot of good work. We've helped a lot of people throughout the country who've had missing children and sexually abused children. And I really do feel that this is an attempt to completely annihilate everything that Johnny's kidnapping stood for and the Johnny Gosch Foundation in one swoop.
Yeah, it's basically a measure to silence you.
I really think so. I didn't think so at first when the lawsuit first was put upon me, but then when they came back and wanted the entire inventory of books.
And future rights.
And future rights.
Which essentially would bar you from ever making any kind of commentary or publishing anything at all regarding that, regarding your son.
That's right.
Yeah, that's unacceptable. And I would have to ask this guy, and I'd like you to provide me off air with his phone number, because I'd like to put him on the air and ask him what kind of a creep he is, that he would take this kind of action against someone like yourself who has done such a tremendous amount of good and has not profited at all from this. Matter of fact, your family has been devastated by it, and you're deprived of your son, and it kind of does amaze me. I agree. It amazes me that somebody like this would...
Few people realize what catastrophic financial burden a missing child can be. You don't have insurance for anything like this. There's nothing to offset the expenses.
Yeah.
And when the police drag their feet, such as they did here, the only way to proceed was private investigation.
Sure, and
so it still is today.
Right.
And I had to move out of my house, and I just live in a real small little apartment now. Right. And the fact that this man would come after me and do this type of thing is just beyond me. But now that he's asking for these other things, now I know what it's about.
Yeah. Noreen, hold that thought. We're going to take this break. When we come back, we will continue, okay? All right, hold on. Noreen Gosch is my guest. Again, she's the author of Why Johnny Can't Come Home. And even more, she is the mother of a 12-year-old boy that was kidnapped, forced into sexual slavery. The story is quite incredible. We're going to touch on elements of that. We're also going to look at some, peripheral kinds of things that have occurred around Noreen over the last few months and try to frame up why somebody might want to be coming after her at this late stage in the game. I mean, I have to agree with her. There's something very strange here.